We had just joined a mini orchestra. She was 3 years old, and the teacher had asked for the children to go and pick up a glockenspiel or, a chime bar. And Zoe came to me and said, well, I've got a D. And I said, well, how do you know that that's a D chime bar? And she said, well, it's easy, you just listen. And I thought, my goodness, this girl is telling me that somehow she's developed perfect pitch. Her older sister was studying piano and would tell Zoe, this note is an A, this note is a B, here's how you find middle C. And at the same time, a friend of mine who was a speech and language therapist, she had a jigsaw made for Zoe. It was an alphabet jigsaw. And Zoe learned her alphabet tactilely. A, B, C began to mean something then, something quite concrete. And she could also apply it to the piano. And I think that's how she memorised notes. I bought a tiny violin from a friend, and I asked people if they would teach Zoe, and they stepped back. No, they didn't want to. They were afraid. That was very difficult to take, but we've gotten used to that. And we just keep asking, and some people step forward and some people step back, and you just have to accept it. When she was about 5 or 6, she said to me, I would really like to learn harp. We found a teacher who was really willing, and she said, okay, let's give this a go. Zoe can come for a month, 4 sessions, 1 a week. And at the end of the month, we'll have a conversation about whether this can work or not. Because she said, I've never worked with children who are visually impaired. Well, we never had to have that conversation because the harpist played something to her and then she played it back. Her first sense is hearing. So her world is created out of sounds and things that she can concretely touch. She had lost the visual sense that makes sense of all the other senses, the unifying sense, if you like. So hearing was the next best thing. And so being able to stretch that, being able to play around with it, literally with your fingers, on harp strings or on the piano, being able to develop your voice, all those things are really hugely important to Zoe's identity. And at mainstream primary school, they knew of her as someone who played the harp and played the piano. So yeah, she was known as someone who did some fairly extraordinary things.
In the early days, it was something that I could do without really thinking about, and I could go to the piano and I could work out by ear tunes I heard, so nursery rhymes, pop songs, stuff like that. It wasn't anything particularly fancy, but it was still something that I knew I could do, that a lot of sighted children my age couldn't do. And I know that sounds awful, but I was also aware at that point that there was a lot of stuff that they could do that I could not do. I think that helped keep me interested in the piano.
As the music became more difficult to play, as she got through her grades, and she was having to jump sort of across strings, harp strings, or else jump up and down the piano, that to a certain extent is still a leap of faith every time she does that. Zoe was offered a place at the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire in the junior school on a Saturday, and they were able to apply for some funding that enabled them to help Zoe to access composition class, and piano, and eventually she played with the wind band as well.
The tutorial today is the first of my second year at university, and over the holidays I've been doing quite a lot of composition. Oh my goodness. Oh, what was he like? But yes, Simeon.
Can you just talk about the relationship between the vertical and the horizontal here, the harmony and the line?
I mean, they just sort of arrived together. So I'll turn up, he'll put a kettle on, and then we'll just sort of discuss what I've done over the last week or 2 weeks or whatever. And it's really informal, and through that I just feel a lot more comfortable talking about what my processes are. Magnificat.
You've done a lot of Sibeliusing.
I've done a lot of Sibeliusing, yes.
Heavens.
So here we are, a Magnificat.
Now, how did you go about this? You're a choral scholar, you sing Magnificats, you know it's a very well-known text.
Yes.
So what set you off? What was your approach to this?
First, I figured out what I wasn't going to do. I listened to a bunch of Magnificats.
Yeah. Lots
of Victorian old men starting off with the perfect fourth.
Can you give me an example of what you mean?
That's Noble in B minor. And it's a banging piece, don't get me wrong, it's just not going to pull high marks in a composition exam because, I don't know, it's all been done before. So I compose using Sibelius 5, yes I know. It is the last version of Sibelius that is completely compatible with the screen reader. I'm using JAWS. I tend to compose at the piano, and I have in my head what I'm going to write before I put it into Sibelius.
I love the way you've used the words to actually create rhythmic counterpoint, as the Renaissance composers do. So that from their seat, but here, the mighty from their seat is still going on lower down. And the way you've set it.
Last year was really difficult because I've come from a set of very sciencey, mathsy A levels to an essay subject, but then obviously there's all the music stuff as well, so I have to compose, I have to practice. I've never done this much reading in my life, but I really am enjoying learning how to do it. I was just sort of playing around, and I thought it would be interesting to get a repeating pattern of chords, because obviously chords, it sounds like foray. It's great, but it does sound like foray.
Yeah, but it doesn't go on like foray. I mean, we look for potential in interviews, and I test people when they're admitted. I ask them to harmonise a chorale tune. Most people can look at it for 5 minutes. She couldn't, and I said to her, "I'm terribly sorry, we haven't actually had this set up." And she said, "Oh, it's all right, just play it to me." And some people stagger along and have never done it, and some halfway it starts going. Zoe played it straight through and then said to me, "I'm terribly sorry, I played a wrong note in the tenor there. Can I do it again?" I said, "No, there's no need to do it again."
I mean, I do find genitalating quite difficult.
You do, because the thing is, you haven't got endless tritones, which we know are a nightmare.
Those are
and the other thing, you haven't given people things where they've got to go. Or, you know, this is a nice bass line. She said to me, "How are we going to work?" at her first tutorial. With Zoe, the adjustments have all been just positive ones. It's made me sharpen up. I'm not thinking at all about her sight. That is a very, very good Magnificat, if I may say so.
Thank you.
And saving that A like that, and for that, I was wondering how you were going to treat that World Without End. Amen. I thought, oh, it's going, you know, it's being thrown away, but then you suddenly pulled it out and it soared, which was very
Which
clever.
essentially means I have to do something equally impressive with the nunk.
Now look.
It's the same feeling like I had when my first child went to university. this sort of, oh, I hope I've done a good enough job that they can cope and they can live fairly independently on their own. Sometimes accessing books, the library is now up and running and you know, giving her a lot of information in good time for her to be able to read up. And she does have someone who scribes for her. She's learned over the year that she can ask, and they'll try their best to put things in place for her. I think this has been very, very good for her, yes.